I'm Marc Michaud, co-creator of Home, and you're listening to the True North Country Comics podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book and graphic novel creators and supporters. I'm John Swinimer. If you want to drop me a line, you can contact me at john@truenorthcountrycomics.com. On this episode, I chat with Marc Michaud about making the graphic novel Home, Volume 2 at the 2022 Montreal Comic Arts Festival. This podcast is available on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. It's also available on the True North Country Comics channel on YouTube. I invite you to like and subscribe. Marc, along with his brother Daniel, grew up on a farm on the Great Canadian Plains under some of the most expansive skies on the planet. They shared a love of comics and dreamed of one day creating them together. Their ongoing black and white science fiction graphic novel series, Home, consists of two distinct yet linked series. Book 2 of the epic sci-fi series includes Volume 2 of Arc 29 by Marc Michaud and Volume 2 of Demeter by Daniel Michaud. Available now from New Friday Comics, it's 106 pages of glorious black and white art. Arc 29 is described as, in a flashback to Patrick's youth, we learn how he came to leave Demeter. Meanwhile, Orlando surprises his crew with an option to leave their fugitive lifestyle behind. And the Demeter storyline goes like, plagued by nightmares while in stasis, Emmanuel is awoken from his slumber by Cyril and presented with troubling news about their mission. And so, without further ado, here's my chat with Marc Michaud about making the graphic novel Home, Volume 2 at the 2022 Montreal Comic Arts Festival. So, Marc Michaud, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate your time. Before we get started with the questions, I want to ask you, what's on your bedside reading table? What are you reading today?
Well, actually, over the past week, I've been digging out my old comic boxes from the garage, and I pulled out the complete run of Alan Moore's Supreme.
Oh, wow.
So, it falls under Rob Liefeld's Image Comics, that kind of thing, but Alan Moore took a good long stretch at it, and it's been a long time since I read it. I remember it fondly, and I wanted to go back to it and see if it's as good as I remember. And yeah, so far it holds up. It's a lot of fun.
That was sort of his take on the whole Superman type of thing, but with his own character, correct?
Yeah, and then the way that Alan Moore kind of takes a spin on it is that with every revision that the character takes, they're relegated to essentially like a purgatory. And so with every new writer that comes on and does a new origin story or whatever it is for Supreme, the old version of Supreme is now in this purgatory. And so yeah, he kind of plays with this idea of the reboot, the endless reboots in superhero comics, and yeah, it's fun. Yeah, it's sort of like an in-joke, I guess. When you're reading it, you go, wait a second, he's really talking about that. So, yeah, it was pretty cool. Well, we're here talking under the context of the Montreal Comic Arts Festival, and I understand you're an exhibitor this year. So with that in mind, do you have any favorite festival or convention moments that you can share? I guess the main one is just more on a fan level than on as a creator. It was at TCAF. I'm going to say 2012, but I'm not positive on the date. One of my favorite living artists, a Japanese manga artist named Taiyu Matsumoto, was in Toronto. So I was able to, just briefly meet him, get him to autograph a book, and I gave him a copy of one of my minis as well. So it's more of a fan moment than it is anything else, but it was really, it was special to meet somebody that I hold in very high regard.
Yeah, absolutely. Did he give any feedback to you at all, or any hints or suggestions or anything?
Well, through his translator, he said that it looked good, the mini that he was flipping through, but it was, it was a very quick kind of, there's a lineup of people that wanted to meet him. So, it happened very quickly and, through a translator. So it wasn't the easiest.
Yeah. Well, still, that's a fun moment to have, that's for sure. So, as I mentioned, you're going to be at the Montreal Comic Arts Festival. So I'm wondering if you could talk a wee bit about what you'll be showcasing at the festival.
Okay, so the last time we spoke, book 1 of Home was available, and book 2 was in the pipeline. It was initially supposed to come out in the late summer, but with paper shortages and just different problems that were encountered all over publishing, not just with our book, but it eventually came out in like December, kind of January, end of the year, early this year.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the first time that we kind of have a chance to really show book 2. So that's kind of the big thing that we're showing. And in the meantime, I've kept working on the next stories. So I've finished my portion for book 3, and I've also finished my portion for book 4, which is actually up for one of the awards at the festival in Montreal this year.
Congratulations. That's great.
Yeah, thank you. For independent English language comic.
Nice. For those not familiar with your book, how would you describe it to someone?
I would describe it as like a character-based science fiction that I work on with my brothers. So we each tell our own stories in a shared universe, and the stories are separated by about 400 years. So there's no real overlap of characters or anything like this. It's more like ideas and locations and, maybe family names, things like this. But so we each tell our stories in this universe, but the stories tend to be more centered around the character. It's not going to be a hero out to change the universe. It's much more personal stories that are taking place in a science fiction setting.
Right. And when you said before that you've done your part, I assume that means that you're giving it over to your brother. You're handing it off to finish his part then. Is that it?
Well, it's not so much that I hand it over. They're really two separate units, so my portion is essentially finished. I mean, I'm sure there are edits and things that'll change between now and publication, but for the most part, my story is finished, and Daniel is still working on his. So he works slower than I do and has less time to be able to devote to it. So that's why he's a bit behind me in terms of production.
Last time we talked, we did talk a wee bit about how you create your art and create your books. I wonder if you could walk me through again, just remind me of the process.
Sure. The way that I do it is for the writing comes first, I guess, so, and I spend a long time just kind of ruminating and thinking about the ideas before, doing things like thought trees and, these types of writing exercises that we all did in high school, like just trying to build up the idea that will eventually become a story. And once I feel that I have enough of that story worked out, then I jump right into thumbnailing, and I will thumbnail my story with loose script next to my thumbnails. This is all done in pencil on paper. Mm-hmm. And then from there, I jump to the computer where I do my roughs and pencils on a computer at full scale with dialogue so that I can see it as a page and as a completed document. From there, I print it out in a non-photo blue at full size at 11 by 17 pages, and then I ink them, letter them on paper, scan it into the computer, and do my final edits on the computer.
So it's a little bit of both then, traditional and digital, going back and forth.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, very interesting. Yeah, and that works for you then. You found a sort of rhythm to it, I guess, that works for you.
Yeah. The printing out in non-photo blue really takes away a lot of the stress for me of penciling and inking over pencils, because if you ink over your pencils, over your original pencils, if you make a mistake, you're coming in with white paint or you're really kind of screwed. It's really difficult to correct that problem. When I print these pages off, in the back of my mind, I know that if I do make a big mistake, I can print off another one, start from zero. There's no issue with that stress of ink on paper being that final line. That said, I haven't had to reprint very many pages, but it does just kind of alleviate that stress, I guess.
I guess devil's advocate in me would say, well, why don't you just keep it all in the computer, and why would you print off pages?
I have actually book 1 I drew entirely on the computer for the sake of speed, I guess. My kids were younger. I had to be a lot more hands-on as a parent. So it was a choice that I made to draw it completely digitally. After that, I started doing more printing and then inking over the prints, because I guess part of me is just a traditionalist in the sense that I like the tactile feeling of ink on paper and seeing it in front of me with my eyes on paper instead of my eyes on a screen. There's just something different there. But that said, I mean, I can adapt my work pipeline to be completely digitally if I wanted to. I just kind of prefer it this way. And at the end of the day, if I wanted to, it also gives me kind of an object that I could sell or display or, something like this as an original piece of art.
Yeah, it makes sense. I probably should have asked you this before, but you've been to the Montreal Comic Festival before, I'm sure. How would you describe, what's the feeling when you're there? How would you describe it to someone?
This year they're going to be doing something different, so I'm curious to see how it works out. They've rented out, as far as I know, I think they've rented out like storefronts along the street. Previously, what they did, they had large outdoor tents, and it was held in a public park. Yeah, in the month of May, so it was often wet. I think I've been there 3 years, and I think it rained every time that we were there, so it made for kind of soggy tents, but it's fine. The atmosphere is good. There's a lot of people, but it's generally dominated by European bande dessinée and the Québécois French francophone comic scene. So it's a very different feel than TCAF or VanCAF in Vancouver. Those are kind of the only other festivals I've really been to. Yeah, Montreal just has a very different feel because of how much a European influence and how much of a local scene Quebec has. I think they have 3 independent publishers that are, quite successful and putting out books regularly just for their market. So.
Right. Now you mentioned bande dessinée, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around that. For me to sort of explain it would be something like more real life type of stories. Is that accurate to say?
Not really, because it really covers all the entire spectrum of storytelling is available to you. Everything from, realistic, historical documentation all the way to Asterix and Obelix or Tintin or Lucky Luke, and everything in between. Really, everything that comes out from the European market, basically, you can kind of umbrella term it as bande dessinée, and then from there, any genre you can think of is available.
Okay. Well, it certainly looks like there's going to be a lot of interesting people there, a chance to network as well for you, I guess, for a lot of people who've been inside for these last few years. This is a real chance to get outside and rub shoulders and that sort of thing. I guess that's something you're looking forward to as well.
Yeah, well, the last festival that I did, I participated in the online festival for TCAF last year, so that's a bit of a caveat, but I won't count that one because it's not an in-person festival. So the last in-person festival I did was in 2018, and at the time I didn't have a publisher yet. I'd had the copies that I brought back with me from Malaysia. I think I mentioned that last time, that the first volume of Home was initially published in Malaysia in 2017, and then I brought some back with me to Canada to try and find a publisher, which eventually I did. So this time I think will be a different feeling because I won't be looking to try and find a publisher. Now I'm just trying to find my audience. And now I have a second book. I have, the promise of a third book and more coming. It's all there. So I think I'm just in a different mental space than I was then. So I'm kind of anxious to be able to, show what I've done and what we have available.
Cool. Now, we've talked about MCAF. I'm wondering, do you have any plans to attend any other festivals or conventions later on in the year?
So far, the only other one planned is TCAF, which is in June. Off the top of my head, I don't have the dates, but in June, I'll be in Toronto as well.
Okay, good. So for people who want to find out more about your current projects and your future projects and where you're going to be, do you have a website and social media to recommend to those people?
The website is HomeComics.ca, and for social media, I suppose I'm maybe most active on Twitter at ARC29Comic. So ARC is ARC29 Comic. That's for Twitter, and that's about it, really. I don't use a lot of social media, unfortunately.
Well, Marc, those are all the questions I have for you, but I'm wondering, is there something else that you'd like to get across in this interview that I did not ask you?
Like I said, I'm really excited to be able to show people the comics that we've made, especially over the course of this pandemic. Just being holed up gave me a chance to be extra productive. So I've got a lot of stuff to show people, and I hope they enjoy it.
Thanks to Marc for the chat. You can discover more about Marc on Twitter at ARC29Comic and online at HomeComics.ca. And thanks to you for listening to the True North Country Comics podcast. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to and like this podcast on Apple Podcasts. And please leave a good rating. Also check out the TrueNorthCountryComics.com website and follow along on Twitter at TrueNorthComics. True North Country Comics is now on YouTube. Please like and subscribe to that video channel. And please send your feedback to John at TrueNorthCountryComics.com. Thanks again for listening, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2022.